Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's discussion of the difference between a 700 and a 750 on the GMAT. I'd like to see if anyone is already in the chat. I would like to say welcome. Please say hello if you can. And then I would also like to know this. Have any of you taken a real GMAT? Have you taken a practice test? Or is there anyone who has not begun studying? Hello, Manan, Pradeep, Rimia. Manan, you say yes. Pradeep, you say yes, and I'm not sure which yes you were replying to. Excellent. Those of you who have taken a practice test, what were your impressions? How did you feel about it? Not as scary as I thought it would be. Everyone, I feel like the real one is particularly different or difficult. Now that is an interesting comment, Patrick. Easy to make mistakes. I would love for you to elaborate on that, please. I'm not sure if it's Vibov or Vaibov. Mindset matter? Could you expand on that, please? Those are two interesting comments. Easy to make mistakes, and your mindset matters on the test. Trap answers. Time management issues. Yes. I hope today to have a discussion, a learning, about how to study, specifically how to study in a way that will begin creating score improvements from good scores to outstanding scores. And there is much about that process that is different from what most people would think of as traditional studying. The intent today is to begin to discuss how to learn and how to learn to that 750 level. I have a series of problems that I would like for us to attempt as a sample set of how to study. And then we'll discuss a little bit how to review your work, how to build on that. Oh, Jaideep. Oh, thank you for that comment. How come some students get 720 in 2 months itself? I work with very many people who are discouraged by those types of comments. And I think what we should realize is when people say that they score 720 after 2 months of study, this may be true for every single one of those people. It is definitely true for the vast majority. They did not really study for 2 months. They studied for multiple years. They just did not aware. They are not aware that they studied for multiple years. Some people have a self-selection into certain studies, into certain programs, certain disciplines that naturally prepare for this test more than others. And those are the people who say they study for 2 months and score something like a 720. But most people are not aware of this. Most people don't recognize how what they have chosen to study in their normal life has actually impacted what they can do on this exact test. And thank you for the encouragement, everyone. So, speaking of the test, what is the test looking for? The test is looking for these three things first. Looking at a problem, being able to sit, pause, do not rush. What is the information you are given? What information is disguised? What options might I have to solve a problem that are not considered traditional solution paths? And then the next two components are very interesting. Look at the problem, pause, think, should I spend time on this problem at all? Which problems are worth more time? Which problems are not worth more time? And the ability to look at a problem, perhaps begin, and then say, oh, this is not working the way I expected. I should change strategies, or I should just make my decision and move on. The mind needs to be trained to not allow fatigue to creep in. Very much so. Our mind needs to be trained for this test. We need to recognize that this test is fundamentally not a test of number right versus number wrong. Now that said, today's discussion, moving from a 700 to a 750, we will need to have some discussion of traditional number right versus number wrong. But first, some of you may already be familiar with this concept. Regardless, I would invite everyone to respond to the prompt on the screen. We have two particular trajectories here. Person one, as the test adapts to them, the test gives them higher questions, and they get a significant number of those higher rated questions correct. But they have this drop off at the end. They have this sequence where they are getting the significant majority of questions wrong in a row. Or person two never reaches the highs of person one, but they also never experience that drop off. I'm seeing 4 responses. And it is actually response B. This scoring algorithm is designed to measure decision making inside a abstract context. The content of the test is meant to be very discipline agnostic. Simply because of your academic background, you should not have a massive advantage just because of this. It's designed to measure your ability to make decisions. And the algorithm is programmed to look at a series of clustered wrong answers in a row as the signal that somebody did not make good decisions. In this case, most likely about timing. Running out of time towards the end and having to miss a lot of questions at the end because you were just having to guess. Now, this graph is presented as though that happens at the end. In reality, anywhere you find yourself within a section panicking and having to, you've put yourself in a position where you have to make so many decisions so quickly because you know you're out of time. That's where you're going to get hurt on your scoring. Do I mean to say that it is okay to get alternate questions wrong? As in, like you get two right and one wrong, two right, one wrong, two right, one wrong, sort of a pattern like that? And if that is your question, my answer is actually yes. The way that this test works, the computer adapts to you. Now, another example of two different test takers. They achieved different scores. What is the same about both of these test takers? In what way are these two test takers the same? They both start at the same point. And that is true for the test. Broadly speaking, every person starts at the same point. There is another similarity. Pradeep, making errors randomly. Dancing Pixie 22, they answered the same number of questions. By that, do you mean they answered the same number of questions correctly and incorrectly? And if so, yes, that is the difference. Now, Vishnu, student 2 failed in the beginning. Yes. But it is important to realize that student two's trajectory could have happened at any time. At any time, when you give a cluster of wrong answers and then do not recover, you will end up with that low trajectory. If that happens at the beginning, very well. If that happens in the middle, you do not recover. If it happens at the end, anywhere you have a concentration of wrong answers and the computer adapts to you, and you do not recover with a concentration of correct answers, you will not raise your score. Now, there is a realistic aspect that it is true that too many wrong in the beginning will hurt. Not because those questions are more valuable, but because as the computer adapts, at the very beginning, the computer does not know your level very well. And so it adapts more aggressively. Lots of questions wrong at the beginning. Ramya, I, I need to say this next part very carefully because there's a reality about getting a 750 or moving from a 750 that needs to be addressed. But we need to be very careful with how we think about this because too many people take this data and move to the wrong conclusion. The initial first few questions are important in that you do not make careless mistakes. You can miss questions in the first 5. You can miss questions in the first 10. You can miss questions in the first 12. The crucial aspect in the first 7 questions, and Manon, it's really the first 7-ish. There's no exact number to that, but it's pretty much the first 7 questions in each section. The crucial aspect there is do not make careless mistakes. Once you begin answering questions correctly in a row inside the first 7 questions, the computer is going to adapt, and it will adapt aggressively. It will begin giving you incredibly difficult questions. And you will need to look at some questions and burn them. Say, I see this question, but I know how much time this would take, and I know that it is not worth that time. Felix? This is that strategy. You must look at some questions and say, I will not waste time on this question because of the awful complexity and the time-consuming nature of this problem. And now I have that time for other questions where I can then make sure I'm not making a careless mistake. What really kills you on this test is looking at a problem and saying, I knew how to do it, but I rushed it and I made a careless mistake. I fell for a trap answer. Which is more important, solving all questions or focusing on accuracy? Pradeep, what is more important is choosing which problems to focus on. They both miss about half the questions. The test will feel difficult for everyone. What we have to do, and our studies here, you begin by taking a practice test. I believe it was Manan who said that the mock tests are very important. And I will in just a moment, Pooja. Yes. You take a test. You receive your score. What you then need to do is take all of the questions that were rated lower than your score and resolve those questions. Make sure that you can answer all of those questions completely confidently so that this bottom range right here, you want to take that and cut that away so that there is no more bottom range for you. You take this, take all of the questions that were below your level, take all of the questions that were below your level, and you cut those out. You make sure you can solve all of those, right or wrong. And yes, Manan, that is the issue right there. Pooja, the strategy is choosing carefully which questions we spend time on so that we are spending time on questions we will answer correctly and we have enough time to ensure we are not making careless mistakes. Now, for almost all test takers, that accuracy rating is around 65%. And Ashish, the penalty for missing a question rather than answering correctly, are you asking about leaving questions blank at the end? Leaving questions blank at the end of the test is very, very damaging. For almost all test takers, the accuracy rating will be 65%. The question is, at what difficulty rating did the computer have to adjust to get you at that 65% accuracy? 700s, closer to 70%. 750s, closer to 80 to 85%. Maybe, actually probably close to 90% on the verbal. It is very hard to get a 750. And in order to do that, you do need to be able to layer your accuracies so that you are getting questions correct at lower ratings entirely correct. And at the highest levels, you're still getting 65% correct. Do I recommend critical reasoning except questions? I do not. Do I recommend skipping them? As in, you make a guess and you move on? That is entirely possible. Yeah, leaving questions, if you leave questions at the end of the test, that hurts. That hurts badly. Now, there is an aspect of accuracy to this that is needed. That is definitely critical. You have to be able to look at questions that are below your level, make sure you can solve those confidently, right or wrong, confidently and quickly. And then as you adjust, that continuously changes. The next aspect to this, though, is something else interesting. These are two official practice tests that I took. You may notice that I took them in the last few days. 720, a very, very good score, versus 770. I'll take a moment. What do you notice about these two score reports? Does anyone notice anything interesting about these two scores? That is one aspect. On the higher score, I definitely did score higher in quant. But these are the same number of questions correct. I deliberately engineered this. The 720 is a practice test where I made sure to answer, I believe I answered 6 incorrectly in a row. Whereas the 770, I answered the same total number of 8 incorrectly, but I never got 2 wrong in a row. It is absolutely critical to understand the algorithm. The algorithm is about consistent progress, not missing a cluster of questions in one spot. Now, we must acknowledge that this is a practice test. The actual test has experimental questions. The algorithm behaves a little bit differently, but this is very, very, very nearly identical to the algorithm on the actual test. It is the official practice tests. So the crucial question for us is, once we get beyond the accuracy threshold required for 700s, how do I make sure that I am not missing questions in a row? And Bob Bobber made a comment, should we spend more time getting questions correct, and then if time runs out, we guess on the last few? That's actually what we have to avoid. Will missing a cluster of questions, Remia, do you mean missing as in leaving them blank at the end? And Bob, the test is designed to measure our ability to make decisions on which problems are and are not worth the time. And so the same number of questions wrong, but if you miss them all in the same spot, that is an indication that you did not manage your time wisely, and therefore you had to rush in a particular section of the test. If we leave them blank at the end, it's actually more damaging. If I had that 720, where I had the lower quant score, if I had answered 6 wrong in a row at the end, it actually probably would have been a little bit lower than a 720. This is entirely about where do we make our decisions and how do we make good decisions even if we don't necessarily know the traditional solution path to the answer. That's part of what I want to address in the next 30 to 35 minutes. How to know which question should we invest our time? That answer is different for everyone. Everyone will have certain strengths and weaknesses, and you will need to learn yours. There are ways to work on that. Classes and tutoring, like what I do for a living, that's my job, helping people realize that for themselves. But ultimately, that is an individual question. Vishnu, does the practice test or does the actual algorithm wait for a few medium questions before going difficult? Or is it one medium correct, it goes to higher difficulty? That depends actually on how much data the algorithm has on you. If If you are at the very beginning of the section and the algorithm has almost no data on you, then it will amp to very difficult questions very quickly, quite possibly by question 3. Everyone, no, you are not late to join. Feel free to join my live online class. It's Sunday mornings Eastern time, 10 a.m. You can sign up on the Manhattan Prep website. And if that is not an option as well, there are other online classes that are available too. To more fully respond to Vishnu's question, if it's at the beginning of the section when it has no data on you, it will begin to give you very difficult questions very quickly. When it has more data on you, say around question 10, 11, 12, you need to get 3 to 4 right in a row, and then it starts to get very, very, very difficult. Does the algorithm throw in an experimental lower difficulty question? The experimental questions are not chosen for you. And so if you were scoring very high inside the 700s, there is no guarantee, but the statistical likelihood is that yes, all of your experimental questions would be lower difficulty for you. Answering the first 7 correctly may not be possible all the time. Answering the first 7 correctly is almost certainly not possible all the time. You will get one of those first 7 wrong. The question is not whether you get it wrong. The question is, did you spend time on it, thought you answered it correctly, but made a careless mistake because you were rushing? That's what kills you on this test. Taking a look at the score combinations, the reason why a 750 is really, really tough you have to be within 4 points of the maximum on both quant and verbal. And that is hard. In fact, you may have noticed on this, I missed the same number in verbal. And I should point out that in these 2 verbal scores, one was a 47, one was a 45. So there's a small difference in the score there. I only missed 3 wrong. I did not pattern those wrong answers in any way. None of those wrong answers were clustered. Getting above a 45 in verbal, it's basically luck. Getting correct answers in a streak matters? Yes. Again, to get to that 750 level, you need to be hitting close to 85, 90% accuracy overall, which means that all of the lower rated questions you can answer correctly almost all the time. And then only at the highest levels do you start to miss questions about maybe 1 out of every 3, 1 out of every 4. And Pradeep, thank you. If we spend more time focusing on accuracy for the first few questions, doesn't it affect our time management for the whole test? Yes, which is why you have to make decisions. You have to look at some questions and say, no, I am not spending any time on this question. And now I will have that time to spread to all of the others without hurting my overall timing for the whole section. That's the idea. This is about making our decisions, looking at some problems and saying, yes, I can confidently answer that. And looking at some problems and saying, no, I don't think I can answer that. How do I make a strategic guess and move on? And then you won't make a cluster of errors, because what happens, Pradeep, is if you make strategic guesses, after 1 or 2 strategic guesses, if you got them both wrong, you'll be back at a question that is within your comfort, that you can look at and say, this is a question I can confidently answer again. Or alternatively, the computer continues to hammer us with really awfully difficult questions, at which point we realize, oh, some of my guesses must have been correct then. Vishnu, I tested that. Actually, getting the first question correct is make or break. That is not a correct statement. I can get the first, if you look at this 770, that trajectory there, that could have happened with the first question wrong. I've actually done that before intentionally, just to test that. Everyone, you're asking two different questions. The first is, how do I learn what are my strengths and weaknesses? And a large part of that comes from this type of practice test data, where you learn to recognize that you tend to get certain types of questions wrong, even when those question ratings were below your score. Those are your weaknesses. You tend to get certain questions correct, even if the rating of that question was higher than your actual score. Those are your strengths. How do I take the practice? How do I even practice so that I take the oral test faster and accurately and in a row? Well, let's take a look. Written 50% wrong in the first quarter means that you had half of those questions in the first quarter. Those questions would have dipped to very low ratings. And so you were getting questions wrong that had very low ratings. And notice that you did not, it was something of a first quarter performance of 50%. After that, your second quarter and third quarter have to be at 90%. Chances are inside that first quarter and inside that last quarter, and maybe inside the second quarter as well, all of them where you were around 50% accuracy, you were actually getting questions wrong in clusters. Can the ESR reveal what type of question is my weakness? To some extent, yes. If you're talking question types on sentence correction versus critical reasoning versus reading comprehension, or problem solving versus data sufficiency, definitely. If you're speaking of content areas, the quantitative enhanced score report is better for that. Are we ready to look at a few questions? Vishnu, if you got a 650 in the last mock, first of all, you don't take the overall score. You look at your subscores. And this is particularly true for Manhattan prep practice tests, really. You look at your subscore and you say, here is my overall score. Which questions had a difficulty rating below my ultimate score? Not the 650, not the 3-digit number, the up to 51 number in verbal and quantitative. And then make sure all of the questions that were below that score are questions that you will now answer correctly, confidently, and quickly. Best strategy to handle the algorithm, develop a roster of strengths where you know you can answer them quickly and confidently and correctly, and then have a guessing strategy for the ones that you cannot. Now again, for 750s, that needs to be close to 85%, maybe closer to 90% on verbal. Do we have pen and paper? Serious question, do you have pen and paper with you? I would like for you to try the problem that I'm about to put on the screen. One yes. Several. Okay, good. Here we go. Now, I will be timing you. Take a few moments. Attempt this problem. That is the traditional 2 minutes average time for quantitative questions. Pardeep Krishnan, you said, I guess it's B. I'm wondering if you can concisely in the chat explain what is the source for that guess? In Dancing Pixie 22. There is no crying face emoji for that. There is no need for that. We decide eagerly, confidently to burn some questions. And notice I say burn, not skip. I want us to think of these as I choose not to do it, not I am forced not to do it. And the question that I asked Pradeep, I would like for everyone to consider. If we were to guess on this problem, we should guess B. Part of the goal of not missing clusters of questions is having a strategy for guessing when you choose to guess. Notice I did not say when you have to guess, when you choose to guess. Why should we guess B on this problem if we need to guess? Statement 2 contains more information than Statement 1. Statement 2 is more complicated than Statement 1. And we're coming back to how we know that it's definitely not Statement 1. We'll come back to that in a moment. But first, we need to recognize that we must embrace complication. What makes us the least comfortable is very often the path we should take on this test. Now, does the integer k have a factor, p, such that 1 is less than p is less than k? The first part of this is just content decoding. How do we look at this problem and say, you are speaking of factors? You are speaking of factors between 1 and the number itself? What is the definition of a prime number? A prime number has only 1 and itself as factors. This question is asking whether k is prime. I'd like for everyone to try a variation. Everyone take a moment and consider this variation on the problem we just did. I'll give you 1, maybe 2 minutes. Okay. First, how is the prompt itself identical to the previous problem? Not the statements, the prompt. Easy to digest. There's less math notation in the prompt itself, but it is still at its core the same question. If you can be expressed as the product of two integers, each of which is greater than 1, you are not prime. So we could be asking, is k not prime? Or alternatively, is k prime? These two questions are two sides of the same coin. If k is prime, then the answer is no, it is not prime. Statement 1, k is greater than 4 factorial. 4 factorial is 24. K is greater than 24. But take a moment and I organize. K could be 25. Is 25 prime? No, it is not. K could be 29. Is 29 prime? Yes, it is. So statement 1 is not sufficient. Answer choices A and D must be wrong. K is between 83 and 89. I must be only doing integers, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89. First thing, all of the evens, not prime. 85 is a multiple of 5. 87 would be a multiple of 3. And now oh wait, 89 doesn't even belong on the list. Don't know what I was doing there. Somebody said something a moment ago about careless mistakes. We're all prone to them. You always have to check your answers. You always have to have the time to look at your work. That happens. You have to be able to look at this, process it, put your thoughts down on paper, and then look at what you've written down and check to make sure that you haven't made any errors. Is K prime? No, K is never, ever, ever prime. May not have been the answer we wanted, but it is an answer. And so this would be statement 2 alone is sufficient. Questions, comments, concerns before we see yet another new problem and then return to the original? One more. Give this problem an attempt, please. very nearly 2 minutes for an attempt. Patrick, your question is actually at the heart of this trio of problems. To answer this one first, however, we begin by recognizing that the question itself is still the same. To ask whether you have more than one factor greater than 1 is to ask whether this thing is prime. In a similar fashion to the previous, you could set this up with a number testing plan. Let's make A is a multiple of 3. Let's say that A is 3 itself. B could be 1, in which case C is 4. Is that prime? No, it is not. B could be 2. C is 5. Is that prime? Yes, it is. Not sufficient on its own. Statement 2. A, B, C is C prime. B is a multiple of 6. A could be 1, in which case C is 7. That is prime. A could be 2, in which case C is 8. That is not prime. Not sufficient on its own. Now, the next part of this is about one of the third listed components about what the GMAT needs for very high scores, flexibility. Statement 1, Statement 2, I number tested individually. Statement 1 and 2. I would approach this by a more theoretical analysis. A is a multiple of 3. Statement 2 says B is a multiple of 6. But any multiple of 6 is also a multiple of 3. So I have one multiple of 3 plus another multiple of 3. Whenever you add two things that have the same multiples, you will receive yet another multiple of 3. C will be a multiple of 3. That will not be prime. Correct answer here is C. The two statements combined are sufficient. Oh my goodness. These three examples are data sufficiency, and data sufficiency is where Felix's concern becomes most prevalent. What concept is the question asking? In this particular question type, my personal goal, I want at least 2 ways to write every question. Here, does C have more than one factor greater than 1? I can rewrite that as is C prime. There are 2 ways to ask that question. Sometimes up to 5 ways that I have expressed the question itself. Now, Patrick, will all 700 questions test the same core concepts, or will they be ones you have never seen? Occasionally, there may be something you have never seen, or I should say, there may be something that you don't recognize that you have seen. They can disguise these very, very well. But fundamentally, the questions are all based around the same content. Who was it who earlier made a comment about getting to the 750, learning how to channel this individual question analysis to super high scores? What we see here is a trio of problems that establish that. This problem, probably high 600s for difficulty rating. A lot of people are not aware of the theory behind the multiples of 3s when you combine the statements here. This problem, probably mid 600s, because it is so number testable and you get the correct answers strictly through number testing. This problem, this is your 750 level version of those same 2 problems. Notice that the prompt is the same. Fundamentally, as notation heavy as this prompt is, it is still fundamentally asking, is K prime? Statement 1 is still approachable through number testing. Statement 2 is not approachable through number testing at all. You need to have a theory basis for statement 2. And what you study is you learn to recognize when the same theory applied to multiple questions. You want to scale your knowledge. This theory applied in this more direct question. When does another question apply the same theory but in a more confusing, more complicated presentation? Yeah, sorry, bad mouse clicks. 13 factorial will have all of the factors from 2 to 13. I will be adding something that is already a factor to this original number. This is what we saw in this problem. When you add two things together which already have the same factors, you end up with another item that has the same original factor. So all of these K versions will have at least one factor contained greater than 1. And yes, Jaideep, you're greater than or equal to versus greater than or less than, the actual logic here would not have changed. How do I quickly determine whether the range actually does or does not have any primes? You need to have the theory behind that. You need to have answered that A, B, C question correctly and have learned the theory in that particular answer where you combine the statements and be able to look and under study of this, recognize, oh, I am adding to a thing that is already that same multiple. Seven to 8 back-to-back mistakes due to lack of time and got verbal 36. How much back-to-back wrong questions heard verbal score? If those had not been back-to-back wrong, you probably would have gotten a 40 or 41 on verbal. That's an estimate. Please be aware that there is a lot of flexibility in that the algorithm is very complicated. But that would have probably been something along those lines. So, how to study. The first thing of how to study is learn how to layer from lower rated, more straightforward presentations of a certain concept to the more complex presentations of a concept. You must be able to look at clusters of problems which are in the same core content and learn how to scale up from low to high. On the verbal side, there's a lot in verbal, but you cannot ignore sentence correction. I know we're almost at time, but I'll give you 1 minute to consider this problem. That was 1 minute. That's fast, even for sentence correction, which needs to move very fast. But I want to show you a study process for sentence correction. Studying sentence correction is about breaking down the pieces of the problem. First piece of the problem, where is my subject, where is my verb? In the original, examples include these things. There's my subject, there's my verb, there's my subject, there's my verb. They've changed the subject here. Now my subject is tulipomania, which say that 5 times fast. And here, tulipomania included. Where's my subject, where's my verb? And then notice these structures, notice the components. And somebody's saying parallelism here. In the original, the examples include speculative bubbles in South Seas trading rights, speculative bubbles in Victorian real estate, speculative bubbles in the US stock market, and speculative bubbles in the obsession. And that point is where you go, I'm sorry, what? Speculative bubbles in the obsession? How would you have a bubble in an obsession? That does not function. And now we ask, all right, which of the others have the same issue? Notice that my other two choices change up. They set up two different parallel structures in here. It includes speculative bubbles in these three things, as well as the obsession for this other thing. And then for your last one, when your sentence is this long delayed, you have what we call an opening modifier, and that's going to be a problem. Examples weren't coined from this tulip craze. Tulipomania was coined from this tulip craze. This is the study of sentence correction, my friends. Now, we are at our hour. I would like for you to consider coming to a session 1 if you have not already. We work into a lot of this content starting in session 1, and you can go through the full course there. If you are studying on your own, the thing that I would say more than anything else, please, please review the questions that are below your difficulty rating and score, and review them right or wrong. Keep in mind, every time you answer a question correctly, something worked. How could you apply that to a future question? Do need to go here in just a few moments. But I want to thank you all for your participation here. Yeah, Vishnu, if you want to get a 45 in verbal, you cannot skip a reading comprehension passage. You could skip maybe one question, burn one question, but not a whole passage. And Jaideep, in B, you had two fundamentally different sets. It includes speculative bubbles, and it includes the obsession. And then there were 3 examples of speculative bubbles, but they were listed separately. Thank you all. I hope you've enjoyed this. I have. Perhaps I'll see you in one of my classes. That would be delightful. Regardless of that, though, I really do want to sincerely wish all of you the best of luck. I hope you all achieve your success on this, and I hope you are very happy with where you end up. You are all very, very welcome, and thank you.